Sacramento, I'm sure you all know, United Nations Association, and we're all over the world. And of course, United Nations' primary goal is collective security or world peace. And of course, that's what we support in Sacramento. We have a number of main issues that we're dealing with or following up with this particular session or season. We're dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian issue. We're dealing with sustainability. We're addressing women's issues. And Edgar Trujillo, who is our never-ending, working hard president, simply brought it to our attention and invited those of us who would like to attend. And here we are. I don't know what more information you might like, but I think there are, 3 or 4 of us here. So we're very, very happy that you invited us to join. It's really a privilege and a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Next, I will introduce Barb, and before I do that, I want to explain, some of you know, but many of you would wonder how we happened to make this connection. In September, our book discussion was with Dorothea Bonneau, and we discussed Once in a Blood Moon. And soon after that, Dorothea, who is a longtime friend of mine here in Davis, suggested to me that I look into reading the book that we're going to be discussing today. And, you know, one thing led to another. I bought the book back in September or October and read it and started a correspondence with Barb, and determined that at the beginning of a new year, after this horrible year, it would be a very uplifting topic to discuss women peacemakers. And this is how it all came about. And I'm sorry that our instigator isn't, she often forgets, but I think she got a reminder. So maybe she will join us later. So who is Barbe Chambliss? I'm sure many of the things that you will hear today, you may have read, but sometimes it takes a couple of readings or reminders for it all to settle in. So her description in the book itself about the author, it says she's a psychotherapist, she's a professional mediator,
all of a sudden I can't hear.
Muted. Hang on, I made a mistake. Hang on. Okay, wait a minute.
Okay. I don't know when you unmuted.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Now I can hear you now. Can everyone hear Verena?
Yeah. Okay. I thought I was just not speaking loudly enough. I saw Stephanie going like this. Okay, so to repeat how Barb describes herself in the back of the book, where it says about the author, she says she's a psychotherapist and a professional or mediator and an organic farmer. And I personally thought, after reading the book and studying it, that she probably would, as a preferred description, say a conscious peacemaker. That is not on your list, but it also got me to thinking how difficult it is when somebody asks, what are you or who are you, to describe yourself in, you know, just a few labels. So her real aim for quite a long time has been to bring forth in others the conscious peacemaker. And she will, of course, speak about that more. I thought it was particularly interesting in the week that we have just been through that she mentions bringing forth conscious acts of peace in a progressively chaotic world. And little did you know how chaotic this week would be. So it's always important to get insights into peacemaking, but this week we can really use a big dose of it. Before we continue, I will mention that Barb will address certain things that you may have questions about. And so before you think of asking questions, which she will welcome later, she will tell us something more about what she has discovered in these 3 decades of research. As you remember, Dorothea told us that she had spent many, many, many years of research before writing her book. And this is not something you just decide one day when you wake up in your yurt in Colorado, today I'm going to write a book. This is based on many, many years of research. So I have asked Barb to explain again to us all the origins of the idea. I mean, you can tell a lot of this from reading the book, but tell us again where it has originated long ago. Talk a little bit about the process of how you found the people to interview and how you chose, because we know that you interviewed 60 and there are only 15 in this particular book. So I think it will be interesting to hear how you found them. And you can tell from reading how it happened, and this whole idea of how we came to you through Dorothea is another example of this serendipitous way of finding people who have common interests. And you will again talk about your definition of a peacemaker, because it sounds like an easy word, but it's not so simple to grasp the whole concept. And I also think it would be interesting if you would talk a little bit about the logistics of the interviews. I mean, it's not like you just hopped around the world. In some ways you did, but there were other methods of getting a hold of these people and how you organized that. So after these introductory remarks, it's all up to Barb, and she will welcome questions. And I'm sure she has a lot of questions for us. So thank you, Barb, for joining us. This is, as I mentioned to you, I think, we're always looking for these silver linings in this crazy time. And one of them is that you can join us. I mean, when we used to meet in the morning over coffee in downtown Davis, we wouldn't have you with us. And so it's been a really interesting experience to be able to have a discussion with authors present. So thank you for being here with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And let me say that both Dorothea and I we're the same age. We went to high school together, and we both found ourselves writing books at the same time. And both of us have loved the book writing process, but we don't know much about, and we're feeling our way around how to market a book, especially in COVID times. And an invitation to meet with a book group is sterling. It's a real gift for us, and it's the most fun thing I do. I love answering questions, so please feel free to do that. And I also want to say that I'm just now, because of Verena's early invitation to me and me looking up some things about the United Nations groups, I'm so touched that there are 20,000 people around the United States that are quietly carrying out the word of and the actions of the United Nations in small groups all over the United States. I don't care how crazy it gets in our political system right now. It feels to me like that work is just quietly happening and not letting 20,000 people, that's a lot of people, and an agenda to uphold everything that the United Nations stood for. I mean, it's really, it's truly an act of peacemaking, I have to say. And one that now that I found out about it, makes me less, it makes me want to spend less energy on the blow-ups of the last week. It makes me feel safer in this world. I'll say that. So let me begin, Raina, with my definition of peace, because it's sort of, well, no, I'll back off just a minute. Let me give you a little history. So when I was age 6, my family was born and raised in Denver, except my mother came from Appalachia. So every summer we would go back to Appalachia, and it was a pretty rural area. My grandfather was a state senator there, but one of the things he did as a lawyer was defend all the bootleggers that were in the hollows around there. And at age 6, I had an incident happen to me one night, and it was so awful out in the woods that I forgot it. And I forgot it until I was in my early 40s. But I think if I have to be honest about the origin of why peacemaking got planted as a seed in me, that event probably was one of the seed planters. Then when I was in high school, Dorothy and I went to high school together and graduated in 1962. And as we were entering college, all of our male friends were getting drafted. And they would go off to boot camp and they'd come back and they'd talk about how war was made. They'd gotten inculcated with what the mindset is, how you shoot the weapons and things like this. And I kept going like, well, wait a minute. How do we make peace? And I didn't know how to answer that question. And then it also it kind of took an academic track for me. I found myself studying lots of courses in college, and I have three master's degrees and 1 PhD. And in each of those, I would be looking at what's my relationship to plants, for instance, because I think they are a spirit in this world too. And how do I get in some sort of peaceful relationship with them? And then I trained to be a counselor, and there were people who were so troubled in the world, and I thought, how can I somehow assist them with peace? Although I wasn't phrasing it quite this way. Then I ended up in a PhD program in Santa Barbara at the Fielding Institute. And it's a long distance. By that time I had kids, I was a single parent. I couldn't go away to a campus, and I was so grateful for a school that let us gather only twice a year with students from Asia and from Europe. But in the meantime, we all did, it was a very early program where you did it all by computer, and they did a stunning job of bonding us as students. And I just kind of, without thinking about it, I would say unconsciously, chose the topic of peacemaking. And when you're doing a PhD program, one of the mandates is you have to fill in the gaps in the literature. And so I was looking up who's a peacemaker, and there was quite a bit of information about males, Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, things like that. Well, pretty well researched. And so then I looked up women, and there were only the women that had gotten Nobel Peace Prizes. And so I thought, well, I'll do women Nobel Peace Prize winners for my subjects. But those women at that time, it was very interesting. They were either just teaching about their work because the Irish political prisoner situation had calmed down, and these women had been very instrumental in it, but they weren't doing it so much anymore. They were teaching it. Or Aung San Suu Kyi was someone I wanted to be, but she was in house arrest. I couldn't get to her. Or Rigoberta Menchú Tum from Guatemala, who had won one of the awards, was in hiding because it was so dangerous for her to have done her work. So then I said, well, how about, I know there are a lot more peacemakers out there. For instance, I would consider Gandhi's mother a peacemaker, because who taught Gandhi how to do what he did? So I look a lot at origins and people that don't get touted as peacemakers. And so I thought, all right, I'm going to go looking for ordinary women who by chance are doing ordinary acts of peacemaking, because I want ordinary women to know that they can do this. and considering myself, by the way, what I would call an ordinary woman. So, so now let me introduce to you. And so I would say, just to catch up with I'm gonna say later, is it was pretty much an academic curiosity that led me that far in the whole process. With that little seed of why would some bad things happen to a little girl fomenting inside of me. So I'm going to ask all of you to do this with me. In fact, I'm going to go on gallery view here. So my definition of peace is if you put your hands out as if someone was going to pour it full of cold, clear water. So I'd love it if everybody did this, because there's a visual and a kinesthetic aspect to this definition. So I consider this to be peace. And the reason I do is because these hands are even. And I translate that in society into mutual respect. And if you raise one hand and lower the other hand, for me, this is not peace, because there's a dominant subordinate element to it. So I would go to someone and I'd say, do you know anybody, any woman, which it was called Contemporary Women, the Hidden Side of Peacemaking was my dissertation topic. So it had to be a living woman who is making this happen. And it was such a simple definition that I got so many nominations for women to interview. You can't believe it. And let me also just add one thing here, especially I know we've got one United Nations work whose agenda is, who was it that said you're working on Israel as one of your topics? Mm-hmm. So the chapter in the book by the Israeli psychiatrist, she nailed it. And I didn't get it for quite a while. I had to listen to her interview, then I had to transcribe her interview, then I had to write her chapters and review her chapters. But her name is Ruchama Marton. And one thing she says is, when peace is made, it is a synonym for respect. The main point is that when people respect each other, they're willing, and the next two words are really important, to share power. So it feels to me like almost everything we've seen this past week is about people who are unwilling to share power. Or it's good examples of one camp wanting power and the other camp fighting that, or vice versa. And by the way, after I interviewed Ruchama, my feeling was, never is there a woman that has grown up in the tension between two factors and stayed with it and stuck with that work and gotten nailed by Israeli, all sorts of, when she was trying to get equal justice for Israelis and Palestinians, it was not an easy task. She got verbally nailed, she got organizationally nailed. And by the time I interviewed her, if you've read that chapter, by the time she wrote something for her 80th birthday, she said, I'm tired. I need to pass this on to someone else. So it's a sign of how hard that woman worked in an element of tensions that were doing this all the time, but mostly doing this. So one of my first interviews was, I didn't know who I was going to interview first. Let me say that. So I live near Glenwood Springs, Colorado, in Carbondale. And one night there was a community concert in Glenwood Springs, and I went to the community concert, and it was a great concert by 5 Irish brothers. So I thought, Ireland's in a big mess right now. I bet there are some peacemakers there. So after the concert, I went backstage and I introduced myself to the brothers, and I said, I'm writing a dissertation on women peacemakers. Do you know any women peacemakers in Ireland? And they said, oh, no, we don't do stuff like that. We just make music. But our sister Fanula, she's a disc jockey in Dublin. Here's her telephone number. So I went home the next morning and called Dublin, and Fanula had 2 nominations for me. And one of them was Sister Sarah Clark, who's in the book, and who had spent her whole life working with the Irish prisoners that were in the British jails, and so terribly treated in the British jails. And she was pretty much alone in her work. She wrote a book ultimately called No Faith in the System. And it was 2 systems she didn't have any faith in. One was the church and one was the state. So she just trudged on by herself doing that. So that's how this definition led me to so many women. Let's see. So one question to be asked is, did you make an asserted trip all around the world to interview these women? And the truth is, no, I didn't. I did it probably the most expensive way you could possibly do it. So I was going to the Fielding Institute, and they allowed me to put my tuition on a mileage plus Visa card. And when I had enough miles, I would go to take me and one of my kids. I wanted my kids to see how these women operated too. So when I got enough miles to take me and one of my kids on an interview trip, I'd cash in the miles and we'd go. So my 9-year-old and I went to Ireland, we went to Croatia, we went to Israel, and we went to, there's one other place, I can't remember quite right now which one, and then we came home. And then my 21-year-old and I ended up in Africa together. So we interviewed in Tanzania and in South Africa. I'll tell you a funny quick story about my 9-year-old. So his teacher was all for this. He said, this is the best education a kid can get. I'll send some homework with him and you take him on this trip. So I said to my son one night, you know, you're going to have to be really quiet all the time because these are PhD interviews that I'm doing. And he said, okay, Mommy. Well, he said, why do I have to be quiet? I said, because there's a formality. There's a set of questions that I have to ask each woman. And he said, okay. And he got up the next morning and he said, I don't want to go on this trip. And I said, why? He said, why would I want to go on a cool trip and just sit there and be quiet every day all the time? I said, that's such a good question. So hang on just a minute. I just need a quick Kleenex. So I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. So I changed the agenda from one day of interviewing to one day of fun playthings. So we went to the video parlors. We went to a jail and visited a jail. We went to an animation museum. I got a much better trip out of really listening to my son about that whole thing. One other thing happened. So it took it probably took 12 years, maybe 15 years for some of the interviews to take place. And halfway through that, I live in 2 towns, Carbondale and Paonia. Paonia is the farming town. But they, once a month, Paonia would gather people in our community who had something they were really passionate about, and we'd talk about it. So I was talking about the interviews that I'd gathered to that time. And a fellow by the name of Michael Soule was in the audience, and Michael came up to me on the street the next morning and he said, that was a really amazing talk. He said, where are you going to go interview next? And I said, well, I'm out of miles on my Mileage Plus card, and I'm saving money to go to Asia because I haven't interviewed anybody except those Asians that came through the United States. And he said, you know, look, Barb, so Michael is a conservationist of world renown. So he talked all over the world to different conservation groups. And he said, I have so many miles on my Mileage Plus, I'd like to give you enough miles to go to Asia. And my first reaction was to keep my mouth shut and go like, I can't accept a gift that big. That's huge. And for some smart reason, I kept my mouth shut. And I just started thinking about it's not my answer to give. It's the women I will interview that are going to miss out if I turn this gift down. So I said, thank you, Michael. I just hugged him and I said, I thank you. And the women I'm going to interview, thank you. And 3 months later, I was on an airplane to Vietnam. I was able to interview 13 women in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in Laos, in Thailand, in, well, there was some Americans that I interviewed on the way. And those women actually were part of something, you guys may be familiar with this given your avocations, which is at one point they were trying to nominate 1,000 women for peace for the Nobel Peace Prize. And these women were all listed on the as candidates. So I had an easy set of candidates to draw from there. Sometimes people have been coming through the United States and I will either fly to where they're going or I will, like some came through the University of Colorado at Boulder, a woman from East Timor, right when East Timor was in the worst kinds of trouble. I went to Boulder and interviewed her. So that's how I got a hold. I mean, it was willy-nilly, it was expensive, it was exquisite. And if I, once I market this book, if I could keep doing that for the rest of my life, I would be a happy camper. So, and I'll tell you one other really quick thing. So I would interview, and then given my life, sometimes I couldn't do the transcriptions for maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years. But when I would put on the earphones and listen to the woman in the interview, all of a sudden I could smell what was cooking on her stove. I could see, I could get an image of what her children who were running around during the interview were wearing, their green and white striped t-shirts and things like that. So these interviews have actually become inculcated in me. And I will say, Verena, you wanted to introduce me as a conscious woman peacemaker. It's difficult for me to stand up and say you're right, because almost every one of these women, when I would contact them, and I did a lot of cold calls, my phone bill during those years was huge. And I would say, my name is Barbe Chambliss. I'm writing a dissertation on women peacemakers. Someone has nominated you as a peacemaker. And I wonder if I could interview you about your work. And my goal was, in the committee, my dissertation committee agreed to this. A woman had to be nominated twice, once by someone else and once by herself. And so the other people nominating happened faster than I could keep up with. But when I would say to them, can I interview you as a peacemaker for my dissertation? They'd go like, oh, I would love to have somebody know about my work. I'm happy to interview with you, but I don't think I'm a peacemaker. And I'd go like, I think I'm screwed for my dissertation if they don't do this. So my oldest son said to me, Mom, ask them their definition of peace. And then ask them if they're doing anything that brings that about. And so those were the first 2 questions of my interviews. And so they'd say, yes, here's my definition. And their definitions were stunning, really beautiful. And then I'd say, do you do anything that brings that about? And they'd go, oh yeah, yes, I do. And then I would just be quiet for maybe 2 to 3 minutes. And you could watch the acknowledgement of themselves becoming a peacemaker happen right in front of my eyes. And no, there was only one person out of all that I've interviewed that said, I don't want to go into a book about peacemakers. So there was my counseling piece. I created peacemakers right there by those 2 questions. So what questions did I ask these women besides those 2? What's your definition of peace? And do you do anything to make that happen? I asked them how they started along this path instead of some other path. And that got me the stories of their childhoods often. I asked them how they funded their work. I asked them what role, if any, they thought forgiveness played in the process of peacemaking. I asked them, did you have a mentor or a dream or something that that tracked you as you went along on this process. I asked them to describe to paint a picture with their words for me of what the world would look like if their definition of peace was in place today. And let me go back for a minute to the Israeli woman, because hers I remember so vividly. She started talking to me, explaining what it was like for her to be an Israeli immigrant girl of up to, I think, about age 10, living in a village with her parents and her grandmother. And every Saturday, her grandmother said, I've made a pledge when we got free, we were not killed, that I would go to the Wailing Wall every single week. And Ruchama, I want you to go with me. So Ruchama described to me what it was like going from her home to the Wailing Wall with interspersed Palestinian small groups of people. Even the Palestinians were speaking different languages a bit, and the Israeli communities there. And it was incredibly peaceful, she said. She said the kids all played together. The adults didn't mix so much because they had a language barrier. But she said it was the most peaceful memory I have in my soul. And when I finally asked her, could you paint a picture for me of what the world would look like if your definition of peace was in order, she said, I already did. I told you about that trip to the Wailing Wall. So that's an example of how those questions unfolded. One question I asked each of them was, what advice would you give someone that wanted to become a peacemaker? And so if we look at the organization of the book, the first 15 chapters are women's stories. Chapter 16 is those women's verbatim answers to the question, what advice would you give a peacemaker? And it's only about 2.5 or 3 pages, but some of them gave, like the clan mother that I interviewed up at Standing Rock. She said, she had about a 5-word answer. She said, tell them to go find an elder. Whereas another woman that had run the Croatian camp that I went to, she talked about how she organized, how she raised money, how she did. So she had like a page thing. And so those answers are quite indicative of the women themselves. Chapter 17, as I got to writing this book, I realized that there were some commonalities in these women about how they went about their work. And chapter 17 is my observation, and they're just bullet points of how these women practice their work. Like, never give up your work, never give up your goal, and never get attached to how you get there, because you're going to get derailed 50 different times. Or no violence ever, including to yourself. They didn't tell me those things, but I observed those things about them. Chapter 18 of the book, let me go back for just a minute, and I will tell you where chapter 18 came from. About halfway through the process, or not quite that far through it, I went out to my mailbox one day, and a friend of mine had sent me a brochure. And it was a request for funding for an organization called the Global Children's Organization. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And this was right during the time when the Bosnian War was on. And we were purposely being kept from hearing about it. Like it was a political decision that the Washington Post and the New York Times were not going to share very much information about the Bosnian War. But there was enough of it leaking out that several of us were going like, this sounds awful. I want more information about it. And we couldn't get more information about it. So here was a woman who was setting up a camp in Bosnia for kids that had barely escaped the Bosnian War. She held 2 camps when the war was going on. And the one she was wanting funding for was one, like the Dayton Accord happened in February, I think. And this was a camp that was to take place in August. So I called her up and I said, I don't have very much money So I can't donate very much, but I could volunteer or something. Do you take volunteers? She said, absolutely. That's what this whole process is about. She said, it's not just helping those children. It's helping the people who volunteer deepen themselves, understand what war is, and be of service to these kids. And you're going to get more out of it than these kids would. And I said, okay, I'd love to volunteer for that. I'm thinking, she was in Los Angeles at the time, and I thought, maybe I could go cook in Los Angeles at her camp, things like this. Well, it turned out her camp was in Croatia, which was the safest place she could hold the camp at that time. And if I donated $100, I probably would have been 100 times richer than I was getting myself to this camp. So I farmed my own kids out, and I got on a plane. A school teacher from my community went with me, and we had duffel bags that were full of everything to help run the camp. And I was a trauma therapist at that time. And I thought, well, I bet some of these kids have been pretty traumatized, and I can use my skills for that. I had no idea what I would learn about trauma at that camp. And it was trauma that had happened to kids that I grew to love during that period of time. So it became deeply personal. And at the end of the camp, the kids begged us. So about half, there were 80 kids, about half of them came from Sarajevo, which was a pretty upscale. They spoke English. They were wearing Guess jeans. They were into Michael Jackson. Some of them had second homes at the ski areas. And the other, and so those 40 or so kids said, can you come see what happened to the city of Sarajevo, please? And will you go back home and tell people what happened? Because we think nobody knew this was happening. Because if they knew, why did they let it go on for 4 years? So we traveled with them to Sarajevo. The other 40 kids were from an area called Srebrenica. And Srebrenica now, as we now know from mass graves and things like that, comprised the largest genocide after the Second World War in all of Europe. So these kids lived in a village where the Serbs came in, mowed down the UN police, came in, killed every male or dragged them off and killed them later, we know now in mass graves, that was 11 years old or older. So the mothers and their children had to escape during the night. And they escaped to Tuzla, which is a city. They had to be in the woods at night, hide in the woods at night. And they went to Tuzla, which had actually grown by 1/3 with refugees coming in from Srebrenica. So the Srebrenica kids said, will you come to Tuzla and look at where we're living now? And we said, of course we will. So we went there and saw what a really good job of providing housing and a space to stay for refugee kids looks like. And I'm telling you, you wouldn't want to do it. They would have to take all the stuff off their beds at night so that they could sleep and then put it back on. They were all living in like a school building with lots of beds put in it, but there was no storage or anything like that. So, and the kids had utterly nothing to do but hang around the schoolyard all day. Some of the women formed into groups that made rugs, but that was about the most forward movement any of them could make. So when I came home from that trip, I was pretty impacted. And all I wanted to do was hold on to my own children when I got home. But over time, I thought I need to honor what I said to these kids. So I did lots of things to tell the world about the Bosnian War. And then I thought, okay, what about you? What are you going to do to make a difference so that something like this never happens again? And I thought, I need to wake up the conscious peacemaker in myself. And more than that, I want to do it to as many people as I can in my life. And that's what chapter 18 is about in the book. It asks the reader, or I've had time during COVID to record the audiobook. So it asks the reader or the listener, it doesn't ask them, I almost wish I had asked them, because I backed off and I said I invited them to do an act of peacemaking of their own and write it up and send it to me, to my website. And I had to put that chapter in there, but to be really honest with you, I don't know anybody that sent me a story yet. So I'm wondering if I was effective enough in that step of what I did. When I used to give public talks to people, I would have them turn to someone next to them, whether they knew them or not, and get each other's phone numbers so they could be accountability buddies, and then sit there for 10 minutes and talk about an act of peacemaking that they plan to do. But I never knew if it ever happened. So by having them send their stories to me, I thought, oh good, slowly I'm going to start getting stories trickling in, and so far it hasn't happened. So if anybody has an idea how to help give more oomph, more encouragement to that last chapter, please let me know. You can, my website's on the back of the book. You can send me any kind of message that you want. I will say that one thing I'm trying to do right now is work with the 17, 18, 19-year-old kids who are so confused about college right now, and offer them a mentorship, let's say maybe a 3-month mentorship, where they would read one story a week. They would meet on Zoom if they wanted to, if they're not sick and tired of Zoom, and they'd talk about what they learned from that woman. And then the last month would be them picking an act of peacemaking, and I would mentor them through their acts, probably coaching them on Zoom. And then we'd get a certificate for from the Peace Academy. I'm going to be getting in touch with Dot Maven. Is that her name? She's the head of the Peace Academy. So they could actually have a certificate that they could put on a college resume. That hopefully would help. And some people have said, are you kidding? These kids are so sick of being on Zoom and things like that. I don't think you'll find any, but that's the program I'm going to pursue starting February 1st. So Tara, I see you looking at somebody.
Yes, but I'm 22, so I guess I'm above that range.
No, you're not. No, I'll take any age range. Anybody that feels that kind of completed project. I'll take if you're 82. And I just didn't know people who really believe that they could do an act of peacemaking, or I will take anybody that wants to either do it on their own or get mentored through it. One of the things that I say that is said in the very beginning forward of the book is, let me just read it because I love it. So I'll tell you guys a secret. The forward of the book is by a woman named Scylla Elworthy. And Scylla is probably the most famous women peacemaker in Europe. She's the one that went around and helped gather the nations about backing off of nuclear commitments, things like that. So I sent her a copy of the book and I said, I know you're really busy, but would you write just a 2-page forward to the book? And she wrote back and she said, this book deserves a forward like that. But she said, you have no idea how busy I am. She's now teaching corporations how to realign their mission statements around non-peace. But she said to me, look, you know your book. You write something up, you send it to me, and I'll see if it's something I could sign. So the truth is, I wrote the forward to this book, and Scylla's name is at the bottom of it, but this is the last paragraph that I wrote there. Imagine a world with hundreds of businesses who come forth with their new corporate and social responsibility agendas. Imagine a world with millions, literally millions of individuals doing one act of peacemaking each day for the rest of their lives. So, Verena, does that answer the items you wanted me to answer?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you. We recognized many of the things from the book. I read it twice, but still hearing you give the background, makes it more tangible.
Uh-huh.
I'll tell you right now, ever since I've been corresponding with you, you know, and you asked right away, what have you done? Or you had heard some things that I'd done. And all this time I've struggled with the idea. I don't feel I can call myself a peacemaker. And evidently a lot of other people, or most of the people you talk to, felt that way too. It sounds presumptuous.
Yes, good word. It did sound presumptuous to every woman I interviewed.
Yeah.
But I could ask you maybe the same questions, is what is your definition of peace? And I could say, just inviting me to be part of this book club could be considered an act of peacemaking. If you, now there's peacemaking and conscious peacemaking, right? So we all do acts of peacemaking all the time. And then it's sort of a reactionary thing. Like you walk in the grocery store and you just see somebody passing groceries by and you wonder if they've got carpal tunnels and things like that. And when it's your turn, you go like, I am so thankful that you have stayed behind this counter to check out groceries. Thank you so very much. That's an act of peacemaking. It's probably not what I would call a conscious act of peacemaking, but it's certainly valuable in the world. So a conscious act of peacemaking has a couple of things. First of all, you need to be awake when an opportunity rolls by. And then the second thing actually comes not from the women peacemakers, but from a male peacemaker named John Paul Lederach. And the second thing is, if you have an idea about what might make this happen for someone, check it out with them. Don't do it for them. Check it out with them and see, and then hone your idea. Maybe your idea needs to be given up. Maybe it wouldn't actually be an act of peacemaking. Maybe you just need to tailor it a little bit, but check that out with them. I have 24 of these things, but I just put some little marks by the ones that I think are easy to grasp and grok. Then never lose sight of your goal and never get attached to how you get there. And then this is part of the consciousness. Every day, revisit the act and see if you want to continue with it. Are you willing to say yes today, or do you need to say no? One other thing is work with and not for. And so how that looks with the hands is if you're aiming, if you're like this, what you don't do is this. And you don't take under the elbow and shove it up either. What you do is this. And it's an act of doing something with them that you would want done for you. So it's slow and it's dignified and it never dictates. It's like I taught 500 kids to be mediators, peace place mediators in the elementary school. And at first I thought I better ask, the parents asked me to do it. So I thought, well, I better ask the principals. And the principal said, oh, yes, we absolutely need this. And the lunchroom lady said, we want it too. And then I went to the kids and they said, we don't know what you're talking about. We don't think this is any. So I gave them some examples and they went like, yeah, I guess I did see Billy get bullied the other day. And I didn't feel good about it. I went home and I cried. So that's the checking out piece. Another one I have here is practice patience and persistence at the same time. Nobody did that like Samboon from Thailand, from Bangkok. She took her boss to court time after time after time, and she never gave up until he was the first employer to have to comply with a safe workplace thing. But it took 11 years. The next to last one is no violence of any kind, including to yourself. And the last one is, when you're overwhelmed by what you can't do, refocus on what you can do, and then proceed with the next right thing. So Verena, just let me ask you, what would help you jump over the threshold of feeling that it was too presumptuous to call yourself a peacemaker, or that it was like accurate to call yourself a peacemaker?
Well, I've been thinking of some examples in my life, and part of it, I think, is this.
Yes.
But, you know, to describe, I never felt like writing it down or writing it to you. But last night when I was thinking about it again, I came up with, this is just a partial idea. Traditionally, our UNA chapter has put on a Human Rights Day reading every December on Human Rights Day, where we read the 30 and sometimes 31 articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in two ways. I tried to find 30 people who could read it in their native language.
Oh, nice.
And then behind them, there would be a person who would read it in English, and everybody also had the text. But the point I want to make, and you can see from this why I decided that this year, or 2020, we could not effectively do this. We've always been seated in, I called it circles, it was really more like ovals. And occasionally I had participants comment on that afterwards, how meaningful it was to sit in that configuration. There was no front and back, no center. Everybody was in a circle, and the preference was given to those who might by some be considered the other. The other language had preference, and the English took second place. And there was a lot of symbolism in that. And I think that's one of the ways that we have created an atmosphere where everybody felt equal, or at least safe. And usually at the end, we had a time when people could say something that had been particularly meaningful to them. Often it would create a response from someone else, but there never was any dominant group. We were all there representing the world and people looking for peace. So that just the physical configuration of that event, I feel is perhaps an example of peacemaking, because we rarely, except in Quaker meetings, we rarely sit in circles. We usually get lined up, and the people in front feel like speaking up, and the ones in back usually stay quiet. And the ones standing up in front are in charge. And I did not want that. So that's just an example. And by the way, as Edgar and Estelle and some others know, I decided that in a Zoom format where everybody's in a box, it wouldn't be the same.
Right.
And so we skipped one year. We've done this for 16, this would have been the 17th year. And I hope next year we can go back to it. And it's very difficult to find all these people. In fact, it's a lot like you looking for peacemakers. I would, all during the year, I would be in some, you know, gathering or even out in the store, and I would hear another language. And sometimes it took some bravery, but I would approach the person and ask them which language they were speaking, and then try to explain what at the end of the year I would like to do, and would they be willing to be a part of that and just read one small part in their language. So it was quite a task to find 60 different people every year, 65 actually.
Quite a task. Yeah.
Year after year, because some people on this call have helped out at the last minute. If I didn't fill all the slots, I knew I could rely on them to do it again.
Verena, are you open to some comments from me about that?
Yeah.
I think it's a stunning act of peacemaking. And I thank Estelle for asking if this could be recorded. So if you can go back and type up just exactly what you said, it will be a beacon for others who have been doing things like that and not giving it credit to an act of peacemaking, just something you want to do, or not standing up in that act of peacemaking. If we don't stand up as peacemakers, the violence makers are all standing up. And not wearing masks and beating their breasts and stuff like that. If you would be willing, I would love to have you be the first story that came in. And if you could email it to my email, that would be best. I'm trying to figure out my my website. I've got a great website, but I don't quite know how to get all the comments that come into it. So you have my email because you've set this up. If you'd be willing to do that, I think you would belong to the club of being a really good ancestor. And no pressure.
Speaking of ancestors, I thought you were going to ask whether we had favorites. And as I reread the book the past few days, I zeroed in on different ones from the time before. And I really loved Rachel Figueroa.
Yeah.
Go ask an elder, because I am an elder, as you can tell.
Yeah.
When you said you could ask an 82-year-old, I thought, yeah, I'm 82. So much focus on youth, which is good. I'm happy, and I'm glad to see people like Tara be so involved. But I also feel that there's a tendency to write some of us elders off because maybe we're not as technologically astute and all, but there is something to be said for having lived a long time, having experienced many
2 wars, 2 wars, 3 wars. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In my family, when we talk about the war, we know which one it is, but when I mention that to younger people, they don't know which war I'm talking about.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So I would suggest that the antidote to being bypassed as a wisdom as an elder with wisdom is to stand up and be an elder with wisdom that isn't sitting down, that is standing up. And is, say, going to a church meeting or some sort of meeting and then raising your hand and offering some of the wisdom that is coming up within you. That's a possibility. Any other questions?
I don't have a question, but listening to Verena, I realized when I was teaching, I went through a conflict management course. Mm-hmm. And when I got back into the classroom after that course, I completely changed the seating. Every class was in a circle.
Oh, great.
And that I never thought about that as peacemaking, but after listening to Verena and listening to you, yes, it was, because I did that because there were conflicts in my classroom.
And what was the result?
Oh, it was wonderful because they could see each one. They couldn't pass notes. They couldn't say anything bad about anyone because that person could see them. This was largely with 9th and 10th graders. And you always have the 9th graders who, as I always put it, came in knowing nothing. And they were the, I won't say the troublemakers, but they were not quiet because they were in the back of the room. So it solved a lot of problems, just a tremendous amount of problems, and it put them all on an equal footing. And that was my whole point. I had some who were, who came in ready to, do the writing and understand everything I put on the board. And then I had a group that sort of tried, and then I had a group who never turned anything in. And after that, grades improved, surprisingly. Grades improved, the interest improved, and it was, it worked extremely well for me. I don't know that it would work in every classroom. Many classrooms you don't have, they're so crowded, you don't have room to put them in a circle. But that was back when the state gave us money to keep the classes at 20 in a class in language arts. And that doesn't exist now. I've subbed some and 38 in a class. I don't know how they do it, but thank you, Lorena, for bringing that up. That it just, it brought back all these memories that really worked for me. I never had, I won't say I never had, but I hardly ever
Had trouble.
had a discipline problem.
So Rosemary, would you be willing to write that up and email it to me?
Sure.
Okay, number 2. And you know what? I could go back to this recording and type these things up, but that's not the point. When you get up the guts to send it to me and put the title in a Peacemaker story, that piece of transition for you is getting completed. Yeah. Nahid,
Yes,
you had your hand up.
yes. I really appreciate the event and the book what you wrote. It is really important for us also as peacemakers to remember there is no peace without justice,
Yes.
and there is no peace without wisdom. We need to have wisdom. We need to have justice in mind to be able to listen quietly, nicely, with a smile to the other and solve the problems slowly, slowly. And that will make peace easier.
You know, Nahid, when I asked the question, what role do you think forgiveness plays? It was very similar to what you're saying. I mean, everybody had their own flavor of that answer, but they said, I can't begin to forgive unless there's justice.
Mhm.
Because I don't want this to continue. I mean, many of them said, they're like, I know at some point I need to forgive them and myself for the behaviors, but I can't do that until I know that justice has a
Like
pathway.
that, what you mentioned, that's a great idea.
Such a good point. Yeah.
I thank you very much.
Tara,
First, I would like to know. I mean, I don't know. I would like to nominate Nahed as a peacemaker. She's a Palestinian woman. She has an organization called One World for Love and Peace, and she asked me to help her with. And I mean, I really enjoy working with Nahed with her organization, and also UNA Sacramento. I mean, it's through her that I heard about this, but I enjoy working with her. And then also, I wanted to say something going back to Verena's point about the elders. And I mean, I guess speaking of, I can't be a representative of my generation, but I can say that I really believe in intergenerational relationships and ways to increase that. And also I'm a writer and a public speaker. So I did a speech about bridging generations because I think it's really important what we can learn from older generations and also what they can learn from us. I think there's a lot of potential.
a lot of cross dialogue would be really good.
Yes,
So,
definitely.
Tara, do you consider yourself a conscious peacemaker?
In training?
Dum, da, dum, dum.
Oh, I think she is.
So
I mean, I can speak to
she's my mom. She's my mom. So
yeah. So I say
Yes,
she
but
is.
remember, Estelle, you nominating her is one thing. So this question's pretty pivotal.
yeah, I think so. And I mean, there's always room for improvement. Yeah, and
I would say that peace is this. Peace never is static. So there's, yes. But you are willing to stand up as a peacemaker. Good on you. And in your helper role to Nahid, it's as valuable as it. I mean, I want to send a book, a woman peacemaker book, to Jill Biden. Not only because of what she did, as I would say, a primary peacemaker while she was the vice president's wife, but when she comes out and gives Joe Biden a hug after the first debate that was so grueling, it's what Rochelle Figueroa said. She said, oh yeah, it's all the people on the front line, and often that's the younger generation where they are marching toward the caterpillars and things like that. But she said also the peacemakers are the women that are cook food for them for breakfast, that are taking care of the children so they don't get on the front line, that are taking care of the elders. She said they're all equal peacemakers. So, and in the story about Chona, Tara, I don't know, have you read the book yet?
I haven't finished it yet.
That's okay. There's one about the woman in Guatemala, and she needed a translator. And her translator, I asked the question, what advice would you give to someone that wanted to be a peacemaker? And then I went like, oh my gosh, this young peacemaker right here that's not only translating for her, but does her work with her, she is an equal peacemaker. So if you want to talk about your role, or it sounds like you may be playing 2 or 3 peacemaker roles.
Yeah, I mean, I did want to say, so right now I'm doing this leadership program called Blue Ribbons. And what it is how you, to honor, I mean, it's by this lady named Helise Bridges. They call her Grandma Sparky. It's Blue Ribbon program, and it's to pass it on to other people to let them know that who they are makes a difference.
Oh my gosh. And you're passing this out?
I mean, I just started recently, but yes, I am. Yeah. So it's like you try to pass it on to let them know. I mean, you give them an opportunity to accept the gift. So you tell them that who you are makes a difference. I mean, I have a ribbon that says who I am makes a difference. And then you tell them why they make a difference to you. And then you let them accept the gift. And well, if it's not virtual, when it's not virtual, you keep it on, like facing up, towards their dreams.
That's pretty creative of how you can pull that off in COVID times. So I don't know if you've all gotten to one of the last chapters about why can't I remember her name? This woman right here, right down there, the one in Rio de Janeiro. So she's working with the street kids that don't even know they exist because they're so badly treated by the drug lords. And she takes those kids out in the street and they hold a hand up together and go like, I am someone. That's exactly what I think your bracelet is a reminder of to someone. It's like, you're someone important. This world is better for having you in it. I wonder if there's a way you could send me a bracelet.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I could tell you the name. I mean, I could send you the information. It's blueribbons.org.
Okay, and I could order one?
Yeah, I can order. I think it comes in packages. You can order like 10.
Okay, great.
Oh, I think you would really, I think she would like you, and I think you'd like her too. Helise Bridges.
I like the people helping her that look like you too. So I can give you another quick example of an intergenerational thing.
Mm. So
one woman that I read the book of was a woman that started an organization called Women for Women. Her name is Zinab Salbi. And I decided, I interviewed one of the women that works for her in one of the African countries. And if you send in $30 a month, that $30 goes to a specific woman, and what she gets training in is self-esteem, in how to run a business, in hygiene, in how to begin a trade and do a business plan for the trade. And when halfway through there, the woman writes you a letter that says, thank you for your donation. Here's what I'm doing, things like that. And then when the training is over, she graduates. And you get her personal letter sent to you, and you get an opportunity to congratulate her as she's going to graduate. And what I've done in the past few years is I've put it on automatic deduction in a bank account that I have. And I have not taken the time to respond to her correspondence. So to take that unconscious act of peacemaking, just giving money someplace, into the conscious world, I have pledged that I will write to these women when those opportunities come up. And then I'm going to take it one step further. I'm going to share the information with my granddaughter and have her write a letter. If she, you know, I don't want to force her into it, but have her write a letter about how she sees the whole transaction going on. Or maybe even make enough money to donate $30 a month to a woman that she will support. So I'm trying to make it intergenerational that way too. Anyone else with any comments? Any questions?
I hate to always be speaking, but because of what you just said, I'd like to tell you part of another thing that I do that I feel does this. We lost our oldest son almost 25 years ago. And immediately after his death, and with the help of a college friend of his, we established, and when I say we, it's not just the family, there are friends involved, a scholarship fund. And for a quarter century, we have been sponsoring scholarships for students, American undergraduate students, to study abroad, because our son had done that. All of us in our family have lived abroad and had valuable experiences that way. And so we felt that would be a very meaningful way to continue his legacy. And while many people get scholarships, we have from the beginning, and that's mostly my doing, stayed in contact. We awarded the scholarships after selection, started a correspondence with each of the students, encouraged them to write, to keep the correspondence going while they were abroad. And then when they return, we keep that correspondence going. And I have recently written about 300 letters.
Oh my goodness.
In correspondence with each of these students, some of whom went abroad in 1997, 1998, and we're still in contact. And we've made it clear to them, I've made it clear to them that we're interested in them at the time, you know, how they're usually quite young when they go abroad, but that we're interested in knowing what happens to them afterwards. And so we've continued this. It's a very labor-intensive job, but it's been just wonderfully rewarding, because initially it looks like this kind, because we, the group, the fund, gives the scholarship, and they've become quite substantial in the years since the beginning. But once they have it, by corresponding with them, we show them the interest we have in them as human beings, in their experiences. And then each year we do a newsletter and ask them all to contribute a little update, so that when we send that to sometimes people that have only once given a contribution, but we keep them in the loop and we have them share what the experiences of these young people, some of whom are now parents and have children who are future participants perhaps in this whole thing, what they have accomplished, what it has meant to them, and often they will refer back to the impact that this 1 year of living in a different culture had on them and in their career choices. And so we've all benefited. They have, we have, and a larger and larger group participates in this. And like I said, it's very labor intensive, but it spreads the benefit of the experience, of the international understanding. And
let me tell you, when it's labor intensive, it means you're conscious all the time.
you bet I am. At 2 a.m. I say, well, that's it for today. I'll go back at this tomorrow.
Yeah, see, I think that's your insurance that you probably aren't going to die soon, Verena.
Well, I'm beginning to worry who will carry this on eventually, because, as I said, that's just been my my person.
your
The
task.
other board members can't do this, but they have other.
An interesting way to read the book is to find out how a peacemaker, as she got older and knew she was going to die before the work was done, how did she deal with that?
Mhm.
You've got Theo Colborn, who took in a director to do it. You've got the woman in Guatemala that had the young woman carry on her work for giving parties for the widows that were from the genocide. Things like that. Yeah. And it's a super opportunity to bring up a peacemaker and let them add their own flavor to it too. My goodness. Do you guys usually go? I'm happy to go as long as you want, I'm telling you, but I don't know if people have to leave just because they have commitments. Nahid.
I have to leave. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time also.
Yes,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much. And please listen to Tara, who would like to see you stand up as a woman peacemaker.
I will adopt her. She will be a nice,
Okay.
a nice young new generation for peace. Really, she is doing great.
Okay.
Thank you for coming.
Yes.
Have a good day.
Anyone else with a question or a comment or an idea?
I wanted to, I'm Trish, I wanted to sort of look at it a different perspective. Obviously, everything everybody has said is wonderful and fabulous, and you know, we should all emulate this and continue and create new things. I want to look at at sort of the personal internal peace as peacemakers that we do literally in our everyday lives.
Mhm.
I'm very much concerned about women's issues, and there are things that we perpetuate in our everyday lives that perpetuate a lack of peace or lack of unity.
Yes.
And that is to perpetuate the stereotypes. Like every time somebody makes a remark about, you know, oh, my wife is my baby, or ha, she is the one, ha ha, with truth, you know, or the nagging wife.
Hang on just a minute, because you got bubbly. My wife is my what?
Oh, my better half.
I see. Okay.
You know, the ha ha ha, you know, we laugh about things like that.
Mhm.
And every time somebody laughs about it, you know, it's like nails on a chalkboard, you know, because it seems harmless, but it reinforces these old dangerous ways of thinking.
Mhm.
One of the things that I'm so incredibly blessed to have a fabulous daughter-in-law. And I have 2 sons, and I only have 1 daughter-in-law because only one of them is married. But, you know, you just philosophically think, well, you know, my sons get married and I'll love my daughter-in-law because that's what we should do. But I never imagined I would love my daughter-in-law as much as I love my daughter-in-law, Andrea. And when I have the opportunity, I say always, because I used to teach in Texas before I came here. And I've only been in Sacramento a very short time, but I would always, you know, talk about how I love my daughter-in-law and this and that. And people would say to me, you like your daughter-in-law? What do you mean? Because we have this whole old thinking about, mothers and daughters-in-law are going to, be at odds with one another. And I found that, my students were kind of shocked by this. And I thought, then I need to really perpetuate it and talk about it, to promote this idea of mothers and daughters-in-law getting along and this kind of thing. So that's what I wanted to bring up, because ever since I just saw on the email this morning, everybody think of something. And I thought, what am I going to think of? And this just kept coming back to my head, my relationship with my daughter-in-law. And when we perpetuate the old differences and antagonisms, that's really a psychological violence. It's not peace. It's I say it's the opposite of coming together. It's a separation, and it's a very clear separation. So it perpetuates this. These old ways of thinking perpetuate these psychological violence is, and it continues it through society. And it's a lack of this. Or as in the Baha'i faith, we talk about that the bird is, the two wings of a bird, men and women are the two wings of a bird. And unless both wings are fully developed, that bird can't fly. It's going to be, off balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's the same concept as this, and this. So that's what I just kept thinking about, how, little things every day, and culturally, we reinforce these kinds of psychological violence, which is obviously the opposite of peace. So
Trish, do you have any thoughts about what you might do starting tomorrow about that one unequal kind of tendency in our society?
I teach and I bring up stuff like that every chance I get in my classes. I always, look for ways to talk about things like that and to promote things like that, and even literally in my classes, in terms of how I try to interact with the males and the females and that kind of thing, or with students who are, international students or students who are not Anglo, this kind of thing. So I try to do that on a constant basis.
What age do you teach? College?
University.
Would you ever consider having your daughter-in-law come to the class and that's
interesting. I've never thought about that, primarily because I just moved to Sacramento and my son and daughter-in-law are here. And so before that, they were literally, I was in Texas and they were here. So that's a fabulous idea, though. That's a really fabulous idea. If I could get her to do it. She tends to be, she calls herself an introvert. But yeah, that's a fabulous idea. Great. Or better yet, not just my daughter-in-law, but my son to come and talk about it, because he is a tremendous promoter of his wife, and that, it's one thing for women. Role
model for a lot of the boys in that class, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
Your son could be a great role model for a lot of the young men in the class.
And not just a role model but an example for young women to see, aha, here is a young man.
I want one of those, yeah.
That's what I want, one of those, exactly. Yeah, well, so I'm not sure.
Let me know if you follow through with this.
Oh, I mean, I say I teach all the time. Oh, you mean whether I invite my son and daughter-in-law to come to my classes?
And whether you want to send me the story of it.
Oh, sure. Okay.
All right. So my email is on this list here. So.
Okay.
All right. Tara, did you have another? Yes.
So, I mean, how would you it's also said that you find the people who are doing things that you want to do or want to take on, but how do you necessarily, I guess like a mentor, how do you suggest taking on that extra step to ask a mentor or try to emulate what they're doing as peacemakers?
The only thing I can tell you from my own experience is getting the name of a woman that I've never heard of in my life and seeing her story and then picking up the phone and doing a cold call. In the beginning, they were terrifying, but I never got anybody turning me down. So it made me be at peace. I mean, one way to look at it is if you ask someone to be your mentor, you might have to explain why you see them as a mentor. I wouldn't put up with their very first answer, which is no. unless they say, no, I don't have time. And you go like, well, can we talk about what kind of time it would take? Might not take much time. And I would just hold on to your sense of what you're doing for them is an act of peacemaking. They may not see it. But when you go to someone and say, I want you as a role model for me, that's quite a compliment. And I would not quit. I would say, could I come back next month after you've thought about it for a while? And I would have in mind what that means. Because a lot of people go like, oh, well, how much time would this take and what would I have to do? And then they're going to have that ego thing that they have to get over too. But it's a gift. If someone came to me and said, I would like you to mentor me in peacemaking, I would go like, I will not turn this down. I need to stand up taller and go like, let's figure out how to make it work.
Okay. Then I would like you to mentor me in peacemaking.
Okay. All right. I will agree to meet with you about what it would look like.
Yes.
Not only that, I would be honored to meet with you to see what it looks like, and I would be really excited to see what that would look like. And I thought the way you asked the question was pretty clever.
Thank you.
Yes, I will do that. I would love to do that. And are you thinking in the way that I mentioned, reading the chapters and then doing an act, or are you thinking of a whole new program for yourself? I'm open to any of it.
I'm open to any of it too. I just thought of this question, but I mean, yes, I'm really interested in learning from you.
So, I know you're of a generation that probably hardly knows how to use the telephone anymore. You probably,
I like telephone.
I love telephone. So I'm going to give you my telephone number right now. Have you got a pencil?
Yeah.
Okay, it's 970
970
208 3073.
Is it a cell phone?
That's a cell phone.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
That is a cell phone. Yeah. My kids were visiting last year and they were all in the living room and looking in my desk drawer. And I said, what are you guys laughing at? And they said, you have a phone book. And I went like, yeah. I mean, some people still have landlines, but I don't.
Oh, we do. Telemarketers.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, they hit the cell phones pretty hard too, I have to say. All right. Anything else from anyone in the group?
Edgar had his hand up earlier. He never asked a question.
I didn't see it. I'm sorry, Edgar.
No worries, no worries. It's just a small comment about, at first I found it surprising how you said that you had not received any stories about peacemakers yet, considering you dedicated a chapter to that purpose. It made me a little sad, but then I realized, we are all our own worst critics, or at least I'll speak for myself. And I think it's easier to recognize peacemaking actions in other people more than it is in ourselves. And so maybe just an idea would be, instead of, inviting people to kind of talk about themselves. I know people like talking about themselves, but I think putting it down on paper and doing that action is another. I think it would be easier if you were to ask people to, do you see peacemaking actions in others? And then if so, tell me about it, or maybe get permission first. But that could be just, another way to get more, engagement on that front.
You know what popped up in my mind as you were speaking? Two things, one of which I can talk to you about later, but is asking people to find a partner and be accountable. Have you followed through with your peacemaking thing and track each other's work and then tell each other's story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That might be a way to even keep it more personal and maybe more happening.
Yeah,
that's a great idea. That's a wonderful idea.
No, absolutely. But I definitely, when I read that, this invitation, it definitely led me to a lot of introspection, because I've realized I've achieved a lot, and I've been able to, help a lot of people through my volunteerism, but oftentimes that's, I don't think about that. I think about what I need to do next to, get the project done and move forward. But no, this is a wonderful exercise, and I'm really glad that you were able to make time for us this morning. Thank you so much, Barb.
Well, you have no idea how enlightening this whole thing has been for me. But so Edgar, would you be willing to just jot down the list of your past things that now in hindsight you see as acts of peacemaking?
Absolutely.
And send it to me?
Yes, you'll get it this weekend. You got it.
So does anybody want me to repeat my email address? Yes, there's lots of heads nodding. Okay. So my email address is, you can look at the book and get my, I spelled Barb a really weird way. It's barb.chambliss44 at Gmail. So it's BARBE dot CHAM and then the word bliss, BLISS 44, year of my birth, at gmail.com. Let me know if anybody needs it repeated. Great. I love this group. This has been so much fun. I'm so sorry Dottie didn't come, but I texted her in the very beginning. She's probably got another engagement, so.
I can send her the link to the recording.
Oh, she'd love that.
Yeah.
She would love that. And if you can send me the link, I have somebody, I'm pretty technological. Well, I shouldn't just say it this way, but Edgar, one thing I may or may not, I don't know if you're up on this, but I may need some help finding a way to get people's stories submitted onto the website.
Sure, I can help with that, no problem.
Technical skills. Okay, great. Well, can I meet with you guys next week? I'm going to write another book so I can meet with you. It's been great.
I was just going to say we're at 10:37. We usually go till 10:30. It's been such a wonderful discussion. I hate to end it, but we don't usually go on longer than 10:30.
I get that. Some of the attention spans like waver, get wider. Yeah. And I have a little rescue dog who is begging to go out too.
Oh, okay.
I'll go take care of my dog. You guys go have a wonderful day. And thank you for asking me to talk with your group.
And thank you for this wonderful discussion. And thanks to all who've joined us, UNA Sacramento, Woodland branch members and Davis branch members. It was wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much, everyone. This is great. Have a good weekend, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
That was really good.
Thank you. Bye. Should I leave?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm just reading the chat really quickly here. So, yes, Tara, that's my phone number. You got it right. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a great day.
You
Bye.
too.
Bye.
Bye.